I'm on a mission to beat 100 video games every year, and immediately after each game that I finish, I rank it among all the other games that I've beaten since the start of 2020. Not by objective quality or historical importance or anything like that, but simply based on how happy it made me personally as I experienced it. And now that April is over, it's time to look back at all 10 games I completed over the course of the month so I can tell you where they landed on the rankings and why. So let's go ahead and jump in at number 10 with Open Roads. This brand new adventure about a teenage girl trying to find equal footing with her mother after a death in the family is one half visual novel and one half walking sim, and it's about as exciting as it sounds. Like most games of the genre, the real strong point of the experience is unraveling the story, and there were a couple of twists here and there that caught me off guard. But at the end of the day, it's on par with some juicy gossip you might overhear at work, so no space aliens or time travel or anything. It definitely suffers from that molasses feeling that so many walking sims exhibit. The inability to run or even jog makes even the simplest task of walking from the front door to the kitchen take an eternity. Here's the real question. Do you like the idea of watching a film that's only about a girl and her mother learning to see eye to eye after her grandmother dies? If so, you probably would enjoy this game because it does well what it sets out to do, plus that's about how long it is. But if you're like me and that sounds like a short prison sentence, you're probably better off passing on this one, even if you have Game Pass and you can play it for free. Next up, we've got Harold Halibut at number 9. This handmade narrative adventure apparently took 14 years to painstakingly develop, so it's a shame that the final product turned out to be so damn boring. First off, let me say that this is one of the most beautiful games I've ever played. The art style has been done before in film, but never to such a meticulous degree in gaming, and it is exquisite. The characters are all very well voiced, and the story, on paper at least, is uniquely quirky and at times very touching, but here's where the problems begin. Harold Halibut plays more like a movie than even most narrative games. There's maybe 5 short, brain-dead easy minigames during the whole runtime, and everything else is either dialogue or walking. It's probably best described as part visual novel, part errand running simulator, which honestly is fine for a couple hours, but Harold Halibut is more like 9 hours just for the main story, and I'd say about half of that was just walking in silence. I think this probably should have been a film instead of a game. You could easily condense the plot into a 2-hour movie and it would have been great. I don't want to take anything away from the masterful art direction here, but if this was maybe up to 4 hours long like most narrative games, it would have been so much better. Moving on to number 8, we have Loretta. This psychological thriller about a distraught 1940s housewife has finally come to consoles, and in a nutshell, it's fucked up. It's still technically a point-and-click even though the console version doesn't have any pointing or clicking, and it's very clearly Hitchcock-inspired. It takes the less is more approach with some of the most disturbing visuals, so you're often left to your imagination to conjure the more grotesque parts of the plot. Even when they do show you everything, the pixel art style still leaves a lot more to mystery than photographic realism would. The impressively well-written story gets gradually more insane as it goes, and the choice-based narrative means I have no one to blame but myself for the depressing ending I got. The only true flaw I could find was the checkpoint system. There's no way to save your game manually, and it only autosaves at the start of each chapter. What's worse, they don't tell you when a new chapter begins, so if you have to quit for some reason, you're at risk of losing a lot of progress, and the menu doesn't even warn you. Aside from that though, while the point and click is probably in my bottom 3 genres, this is the only one I've ever managed to finish, and it's about as fun as I can imagine having with one. Up next at number 7 is The Sinking City. This Lovecraftian detective game is technically a survival horror, but it's really more about the investigations than anything else. There is some very clunky Silent Hill style combat here and there, but most of your time will be spent solving cases by piecing together crime scenes using your innate deductive powers. This is by far the most fun I had. It's genuinely satisfying to use your research abilities with your powers in the map to figure out what comes next in the story. I also got the impression at first that my decisions had a real impact on how the narrative was playing out, but the further in I got, the more that began to wane. Technically, the game is a mess. The graphics are PS3 level, the texture pop in as you explore the open world is PS2 level, and there were moderate to severe bugs and glitches all over the place. The most frustrating issue was that you had to be in exactly the right spot sometimes, or the interact icon just wouldn't appear. So I'd end up going through crime scenes over and over just to eventually find that what I needed was in a spot I'd already checked 10 times. I only played this now because there's a sequel coming next year, and if it's not a significant improvement, the reviewers are gonna tear it apart. Now we start getting into the really good games at number 6, it's Mega Man 4. I'm playing these in order, and halfway through this one I was certain it would be my favorite so far, but the further in I got, the more that began to change. It started out perfectly. It was the toughest one yet, but also the least glitchy, and the first few bosses were some of my favorite moments from any Mega Man game. There are a couple issues I have with every game in the series, like the bosses becoming way too easy once you get their weakness, and the clunky UI that you have to use constantly toward the end, but the main thing that really soured the experience was just the last last couple boss fights. Suddenly there's so much happening on the screen that every graphic was glitching in and out, making it almost impossible to see what I was doing or how much danger I was in. I also got screwed because I used up the weapon the boss is weak to before I got to him, and it doesn't even refill when you die. You just have to start the whole area over or figure something else out. By the end, it was still almost my favorite Mega Man game, but I decided I liked 3 just slightly more, mostly because of 4's more frustrating end bosses. Number 5 is a mouthful. It's Tales of Kera Zhao. This brand new Metroidvania about a young shaman is a bit rough around the edges, but it was mostly a good time. The story is gripping, if a bit on the heavy side, the voice acting is top tier, and the art design uses a color palette that makes every scene pop with personality. The highlight for me was the boss fights. There were only a few, but everyone is a spectacle, and a challenging one at that. Even more challenging was all the insta-kill traps, which I did not love. Why does every Metroidvania have to have spikes freaking everywhere? And it didn't help that the controls were really finicky. It's hard to explain, but if you don't press the button combinations just right, you'll end up standing there like an idiot or plummeting to your death. I wasn't crazy about the level design either. You're often led down long pathways to a dead end for key items, and then you have to just turn around and walk all the way back. And what's with the fast travel locations? They're in such random and inconvenient places that they're barely worth using. It's like they threw darts at the map to decide where they go. But again, even though it's flawed, the game's strong points shine bright enough to crown this indie title my favorite Metroidvania of 2022 so far. Next, we have Withering Rooms coming in at number 4. This 2.5D side-scrolling horror game that just left early access has some of the coolest aspects of anything I've played this year and one crushing fatal flaw. It takes some of the best bits from genres like roguelikes, souls-likes, Metroidvanias, and survival horror games and mashes them together into a final product that is entirely unique. The story has a whimsical, macabre quality that keeps things interesting, and the graphics are charming in a low-budget kind of way. Pretty much everything about this game is great, except for one huge problem. The combat is horrible. There aren't any effective ways to avoid damage while attacking, so the only way to kill anything is just to tank it and hope you have enough healing items to survive. It's not really a roguelike because all that happens when you die is the procedurally generated map resets and you lose your inventory, but that's actually a huge deal because you need a ton of healing items to survive any major encounter. So every time you kick the bucket, you have to spend 20 minutes running around gathering consumables before you can face anything again. It's a damn shame because that is the only true flaw I can find here, but the combat is so objectively bad that it dragged the whole game down to like a B-. Just cracking the top 3 is the incredible Final Fantasy V. I've been really enjoying going through the Pixel remasters in order, and this is my favorite one so far. It's not the story that sets it apart. I actually think Final Fantasy IV's plot is much cooler, but the job system really hits its stride with this entry. Not only do you have a ton of jobs to choose from, but you can effectively combine them by mastering abilities in one and then moving to another. It was ultra satisfying to come up with my own awesome combos like Berserker Monk or White Mage Geomancer. I know these games have had job systems before, but this one really kicks it up a notch and clearly paved the way for later hits like Final Fantasy Tactics. The only problem I had is that there's always 1 or 2 dungeons that absolutely suck for one reason or another. This time it was 2 areas in a row that force you to leave a party member behind and then split you up into groups of 2. I worked hard on balancing my party just the way I like, and I hate having to frantically shuffle things around with no warning. But aside from that, this is basically the standard Pixel remaster experience, and that is a very good thing. This is exactly how remakes of old classics should play. And right above that at number 2 is The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, the Switch remake. You may know this was originally the handheld version of its older SNES brother, A Link to the Past, so it's reasonable to expect a lesser iteration, but I don't know. It is derivative in many respects, but it also improvises on the formula in some really fun ways when it comes to story, gear, and traversal methods. I'm not going to argue that Link's Awakening is objectively better, since Link to the Past built the blueprint for the genre and is known as one of the best games of all time, but I actually did enjoy Link's Awakening a bit more, mostly because of the quality of life additions that I assume were at least partially added in with the remake. I got stuck a lot playing Link to the Past and ended up relying heavily on a walkthrough several times, which just isn't as fun for me. But this game did a great job of giving regular hints and leading me intuitively where I needed to go without making me feel like my hand was being held constantly. I only used a walkthrough I think twice, and both of those times were because of simple things that I just didn't notice or happen to overlook. If you love Link to the Past and haven't played Link's Awakening, you absolutely should. And it doesn't hurt that the remake looks and sounds absolutely amazing. And finally, topping the list as my favorite game I beat in April of 2024, it's Another Crab's Treasure. This brand new Souls-like about a hermit crab on a quest to recover a shell may look kid-friendly, but it had me cursing like a grown-ass man. I was highly impressed by the complexity of the combat. Not only is there a tough parry system and a skill tree, but also different spells for each shell you equip. The story and graphic design are both very Saturday morning cartoon flavored, but some of the places the plot will take you are surprisingly dark and unsettling. The boss fights were almost all excellent, and a few of them had me going back dozens of times before I was finally able to triumph. This came close to being one of my favorite non-FromSoft Souls-likes of all time, but the bugs and glitches were so horrible they dragged everything down. It was a non-stop shit show of getting stuck in walls, falling through the floor, freezing in place, being thrown out of the game entirely, and much more. And the glitches got worse as the campaign went on, so by the end I didn't even care what was going on with the story. I just wanted to move on. If you love Souls-likes as much as I do, this is an absolute must-play, but I would wait at least a couple of months to see if they patch the leaks. So that's it for the month of April, and it brings us to a grand total of 41 games beaten so far in 2024, and a whopping 488 since I started keeping track way back at the beginning of 2020. Let me know if you've also beaten any of these games, and if you agree or feel differently, but please also understand that this is just a preference thing. I fully recognize that if I were ranking these based on their actual objective quality or their influence on the industry, the order would have been very different. I just don't feel qualified to judge games based on anything other than how they affected me specifically. If you enjoyed the video, a simple like really goes a long way, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, because I rank everything gaming, and I put out daily short videos with rankings and memes and reviews for every game I manage to beat, because if I don't finish it, I don't believe I've earned the right to review it. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day.